On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Continental Congress, stating that the once English colonies were now an independent state. A ragtag team of American freedom fighters stood up to the most powerful empire in the world, and in 1783 the United States of America was recognized as a sovereign nation with the Treaty of Paris. They fought in the spirit of freedom and inalienable rights that had been denied them as colonial subjects. But what became of the soldiers who returned home? Daniel Shays was a man who truly believed in the freedom and rights promised in the Revolution. When he returned home to his small farm in western Massachusetts, he and other veterans found themselves in debt to banks. Feeling that they were being treated unfairly, many sent petitions to Boston calling for tax limits, protection from repossession, and a paper currency to repay debts. In 1786, Shays led a band of hundreds of farmers on the Springfield, Massachusetts Supreme Court to prevent it from convening. Shays maintained that he was fighting for the same principles as the Revolution. Thousands of followers had been arrested, and they became a significant burden on the state. George Washington came out of retirement to call for a strong central government to protect the rights of citizens that they just fought a war for.
In any discussion of the history of liberty as a history of resistance in the American tradition, we must necessarily begin with the circumstances which founded an independent America. The Declaration of Independence was the first formal act of resistance against an oppressive English empire, chiefly authored by Thomas Jefferson and signed by the 56 members of the Continental Congress in 1776. The Declaration of Independence enumerated the many grievances which the colonies held with the monarchy and declared rebellion not just a necessity, but one of a few inalienable rights. Although less famous than the Declaration's opening lines, the following statements are arguably the most important. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. These statements outline the principles of government solely for the benefit of the governed, and any government which seeks to oppress its subjects is no longer fit to rule. This meant that the colonies believed that the British Crown had become tyrannical, and that its actions were such an affront to the freedoms of the colonists they had an imperative to form their own government to better serve their interests and protect their sacred rights. This declaration committed the colonies to total war with what was then the most powerful military in the world, and its former government. The ensuing war saw the unlikely American military emerging victorious against the British Empire.
This history of resistance also involves the struggle to change social norms, a struggle no less courageous than those involving more immediate physical danger. Gender roles have inhibited the freedom of our citizens to be themselves since the very beginning of our country, and even before. Women who sought to challenge gender roles were looked down upon by their communities and faced ostracism from their families, their husbands, and religious institutions. Traditional ideas of masculinity or femininity bound both men and women into lives of needless unhappiness. Ideas like a woman's place is in the home, or a woman should simply be a caregiver who stays in the kitchen and raises children, have stood in the way of making happy, fulfilled female citizens. Because of this poisonous social atmosphere, women have not had the freedom to choose their own careers, especially careers which were perceived as male. Even today, many of the rights and freedoms of women are still under attack. The right to break free from unhealthy and abusive marriages, the freedom to choose whether to have a child, the freedom to be financially independent and not rely upon your husband or spouse to be the breadwinner, the freedom to be judged by your individual merits and not subject to the prejudicial judgments of a sexist society. These are the freedoms which we, as feminists, must fight for.
As America moved into the 1960s and beyond, resistance remained a popular means to achieve liberty. As political leaders both rallied and failed the country on multiple fronts, the people of the United States began to take matters into their own hands. On the civil rights front, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X gained support for their movements. Despite the untimely deaths of both men, their efforts along with their supporters brought light to the civil rights movement and its ultimate goal of equality. The Vietnam War proved to be one of America's greatest symbols of resistance. The counterculture movement of the late 60s and early 70s proved to be one of the greatest shows of civil force in American history. Citizens across the nation showed their disapproval towards the length of the war and the injustices being done to the citizens of Vietnam and Cambodia. Many of the protests also revolved around the institution of the draft and the forced deployment of thousands of American soldiers. Though many were criticized for being hippies and anarchists, they showed the United States government that its citizens are paying attention and that when united for a cause, the people have the power.
When freedom is in jeopardy, the people resist to change the laws and instigate the need for a strong national government bound by a constitution vowing to protect the inalienable rights of the citizens.